Alright, Lesson 1, Book 2, The Priestley's House. You have heard in Book 1 about Mr. Priestley and his students. I want now to tell you something about his house. He's an old friend of mine, and I went to visit him about a fortnight ago and stayed at his house for the weekend. He lives in a very nice house. It is called The Pines and is about 10 miles from London. There is a big garden all round it, and I went in at the garden gate and walked along the path to the front door. There is a smooth lawn in front of the house with beds of roses in it. I knocked at the front door. Mr. Priestley opened it, and with a smile and some words of welcome shook hands with me, and we went into the hall. Then Mrs. Priestley came to greet me. I said, "How do you do?" and gave her the flowers that I had bought for her. She said, "Oh, thank you, what beautiful roses! How kind of you to bring them. I love roses, and ours haven't been good this year. These are lovely." She took them away to put them in water, and Mr. Priestley and I went into the sitting room and sat down in armchairs before the fire, for it was a rather cold day, and I was very pleased to see the bright fire burning in the fireplace. The sitting room is quite a big room, about 25 feet long by 15 feet wide. There was a thick carpet on the floor. One or two good watercolors hung on the walls, and there was a large and very interesting oil painting that I hadn't seen before. There was a piano on one side of the room. Both Mr. and Mrs. Priestley are fond of music, and Mrs. Priestley plays the piano beautifully. There were 3 or 4 comfortable armchairs, a radio, and 3 or 4 bookcases filled with books. On a small table near the window there were copies of the Times, Punch, and some foreign newspapers and magazines. Mrs. Priestley returned with the roses in a bowl, which she put on the table, and a few minutes later Susan came in with tea and a very nice cake. I had expected to see John Priestley and Margaret. I had brought a box of chocolates for her. I knew she liked chocolates, but they told me John was up at Oxford and Margaret had gone to a birthday party at the house of a friend of hers. After we had chatted for a little time, Mrs. Priestley said, "Will you excuse me, please? I want to see about the dinner. Did you know that Lizzie had left us?" "No, I didn't," I said. "Yes," continued Mrs. Priestley, "she got a letter about a month ago to say that her sister-in-law had died, and so Lizzie has gone to keep house for her brother. That cake that we had at tea was hers. She sent it to me yesterday. Since she left, I have done the cooking and baked the cakes, but mine are never as good as hers." "Nonsense, my dear. I don't think Lizzie's cakes were any better than yours," said Mr. Priestley loyally. "Take no notice of Charles," said Mrs. Priestley with a smile. "They say love is blind. It seems to me he can't taste either. My husband's idea about grammar are, I am sure, better than mine. But when it's a question of ideas about cakes, mine are far better than his." She went out, and Mr. Priestley said, "It's bad luck about Lizzie, isn't it? I'm afraid Susan will go too before long. A young fellow near here, John Manson, has asked her to marry him. He's trying to buy a cafe in the High Street